Hello, Region 18 violinists. I'm here to help you decode a little bit of the Jupiter excerpt for your region audition. So the way I'm gonna do this is talk about more general things first and go line by line, and then I'll go into some things that can make your playing a little bit more musical. So first things first, we are in the key of E flat major. So we have three flats, B flat, E flat, and A flat. You need to make sure that you are not gonna play any open strings in this excerpt at all. Okay, for us as stringed instruments, we tend to play a little bit on the sharp side whenever we have flatted key signatures, just because we're not as used to bringing our whole hand backwards and closer to the scroll. So every time you practice, I would really suggest starting with an E flat major scale, so that you could get the pitches in your ear. So if you wanted an example of what that would sound like, it would be like this. Nice long bows, make it with your best tone because that's exactly what we're looking for in this excerpt too. Okay, and as for your time signature, you are in 3/4. I know it doesn't say that in the excerpt, but because it's just in the middle of the piece, but that's what you're in. So you have 3 quarter note beats per measure. Okay, so overall for this excerpt, we are like really listening for your tone and also your intonation. Your tone is a big one. You want to always make sure that you are sounding very full and pretty, making it your most beautiful sound. We just don't want to hear any wimpy or shy playing. If you sound shy just by playing with your instrument, that's a completely different vibe that you're giving out when you're playing for us at the audition. This is also a really good time for you to look at the phrases that are available in this excerpt. So I'll talk about that with the musicality thing. But another really important thing to keep in mind is that this excerpt is just very smooth and beautiful. We're not really looking for any very harsh bow changes or any super noticeable ones. If anything, it should be smooth, subtle, like very hidden bow changes. So you need to keep your arm flexible. This is a big thing for this excerpt. If you do not have a lot of flexibility with your finger joints, then it's going to be harder for you to play with a true smooth sound. Because if I am locked up and I have an incorrect bow hold, I might sound like this. First of all, my tone is very crunchy. Second of all, I'm not using my whole range of motion. And then even if I was using bigger bows, I don't have a lot of control over how smooth I can make it. But if I do a proper bow hold, all my joints are curved and I can see that my thumb is curved. That's an important one. Then I have a little bit more flexibility. I would really practice bouncing so that you can see that all of your joints are moving here. Do it gently. You don't need to do like that. But that's also gonna help you be a little bit more flexible with your bow changes. So if I just loosen up a bit, you can already tell that smooths out a lot of the harshness and it makes a little bit better tone. So yeah, you always want to make sure you're playing with a good bow hold, which you should be doing anyways. But yeah, another thing we're also looking for is smooth string crossings. I'll talk about that with the musicality thing. And subdividing. So as you can see in this excerpt, there's only 2 times where you have dotted 8th notes and the 2 times where you have 16th notes. So you really need to subdivide for those to prove that you can actually count in your head and subdivide. Yeah, because playing together as an orchestra is only possible if we can subdivide all together. Okay, yeah, so let's get into it. Okay, so this is the first line of the excerpt. Right at the beginning, you have 2 options. You can do first position or third position. So if you're doing first position, that's beautiful. You just need to be careful of your F to B flat in the second measure. So you're just gonna make sure that whenever you're doing it, make sure your wrist is nice and neutral. First of all, it shouldn't look like this, it shouldn't look like this, but you want to try to tune that so that it's truly a perfect fifth. And a good way to check is if you play those notes together. You just put your bow on both the A and E string. And it should sound very ringing. If your finger is tilted just a little bit off, it sounds really funky, just because perfect intervals are really easy to tell if they're out of tune. So if you're doing first position, that's great. You just need to watch out for that shift right in the fourth measure. So I would, if you're starting in first position, I would really practice doing that shift over and over until it's really comfortable. So with all of your shifts, you should be shifting with your finger on the string, and you're just gonna it's not like you're dragging your finger across and you're like smooshing it down the whole way. No, you're gonna glide it on the string. So you press down and then you hop while you glide to whichever note that you're shifting to. Obviously, I didn't have a note in mind, that's why I was very out of tune. But yeah, you're going to press down, release the pressure and glide, and then press down again once you reach the note that you are trying to hit. However, I did say you could start in third position too. This is also a nice option. I personally like it just because it makes me sound prettier. The color of it is a little bit warmer on my violin. But with that, you just need to be careful of when you're shifting down. I chose to shift down in the second measure from the F to the B flat. I just want to make sure that I'm not going to do a humongous slide there. So if I started the excerpt, I shouldn't hear or anything like that. I need to make it as clean as I possibly can. So that's again, just letting go of the pressure while you shift and making that super smooth. All of the shifts that you have in this excerpt, you should be practicing at least 5 times correctly, 10 if you want it to stick, and you do that like every day up until the audition so that it can be really solid. And also try it with a tuner to make sure that you can actually be in tune with them. All right. So let's go over a little bit of the rhythm. You don't have too much difficult ones. So if we go over the first line, I'm just going to play it at this tempo. So pick whatever fingering works for you. Let's try to play it together. Just the first line. So 1, 2, 3. So you're going to notice that during the half note, I just said 1, 2. You just need to make sure that you're saving your bow and you're using it at a good enough speed so that you can be really smooth through it and you have a lot of good sound. I will also give a little bit of the musical things right here, some musical techniques that can help you elevate how you sound. So if you want to sound really big and use that phrasing concept, I would argue that your first true big phrase is from the start of the excerpt. It does not end there. You keep growing through that half note. That's the highest point of this one phrase. I would say phrase 1 kind of maybe ends there. It ends on what we call a half cadence. It's okay if you don't know what that means. But that is the end of like our first little phrase. So you want to just make sure that it sounds like a complete sentence, not like you're doing everything in fragments. And the way you do that for us is just by connecting through your dynamics. So if you pretend there's a tiny mini crescendo through that half note, you should be good. And also, because that E flat at the end of the line is your high point for this phrase, you want to emphasize it by using your whole bow. So if I start right on that half note, I should start at the tip and then go all the way to the frog. Give me 1 second because my shoulder rest fell off. But I should start at the tip, go to the frog, and make sure that I save my bow for that. And then I will stay at the frog for the next 2 eighth notes, and then use my whole bow for those next 3/4 notes. So it's gonna look a little bit like this. So I'm gonna go save here, whole bow. Yes, and you're also gonna notice that I'm vibrating quite a bit. One really good tip for this excerpt is to make sure that you're taking care of the little notes. What I mean by that is whenever you see an 8th note, a 16th note, anything that's like small in terms of value, you don't want to deprive it of vibrato or the appropriate amount of bow, because if you do that, it just sounds empty. So if I didn't vibrate on the 8th notes, it might sound like this. So you can tell it sounds kind of disjunct. It was pretty da and then da 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 da. So yeah, you just want it to be one smooth continuous thing. Alright, so this is the second line of Jupiter. So for this, we're going to skip right to measure 4 because this is the first instance in which you see that dotted rhythm along with the 16th note. So this one is really important for you to subdivide. Remember, if you can't subdivide, there's no way that you can play in unison with the rest of the orchestra. So you need to practice this so that you can prove to us that you know how to count and you would be able to stay together with the conductor and your fellow section mates. All right, so let's talk about that rhythm. It would sound like this: 1, 2, and 3 So that 3 is really important. If you want to, I would really suggest counting it out loud a few times with a metronome, just so you have a physical way of saying the rhythm, and then you can try playing it. I'm a big promoter of, if you can say it, you can probably play it, right? So that's especially true for rhythms. So I would suggest you try it with me this time. So ready, go. 1, 2, and 3 So the 3 you just want to make sure that you are starting with the metronome click and then ending right before the next one. So 3 done, 3 done. Okay, I would also suggest you subdivide that dotted 8th note into the 16th notes. So 3 and done, 3 and done. That's gonna make it really even for you. So if you were doing that, 1, 2, and 3 and done. That's what should be going in your head while you're playing. Okay, so that's our rhythm out of the way. We don't have any other tricky rhythms in this line. For this line, there's 2 fingerings that I think would work really well. The first one is the printed one. For me personally, it doesn't work with my hand. It makes some things a little bit trickier, so I chose to do a different one, and that's the one I'm going to show you in this example. So this is what the second line might sound like. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so one cool thing that I want you to notice is right in the 3rd measure on those 8th notes, you see the word CRESC. So that's short for crescendo, of course. I would actually just take a pencil, draw in that crescendo, make it last for at least the end of the line. I'll probably even extend it to go through the 1st measure of the 3rd line, probably, so that you can arrive at the G in the 2nd measure. Seeing the visual is more likely to have you actually respond to it instead of just seeing the word cresc, you know? So I'll just suggest doing that. Let's talk about the fingering options. So of course, the first one is the printed one. So if you are choosing to do that one, it might look like this. So you can already tell for me that doesn't work very well, which is why I chose to do the other one. The one part about this fingering that is tricky is doing the 2, 4, 3, and right on the dotted rhythm. So you're worrying about doing your rhythm correctly as well as doing a smooth string crossing. So if you are choosing to do the printed fingering, then you have to be very certain that you're tilting the bow to be almost on the A string while you are playing your D. So this D, you can see I can tilt my bow to be on like closer to the A without actually playing it. So watch that again. Did you see that tilt? It went from here to here. That's what we call preparing the bow for a good string crossing. So you would be able to smoothen out your string crossing like that. And also, if you prepare your pinky just by hovering it across where you need to go, and watch this motion with my elbow, I need to come around with my hand to make sure that I can actually hit that note. If I just go like this, it's probably going to be out of tune. So if I come around, it's going to be a little bit easier to be consistent. So, oh, I aimed a little too high that time. Okay, so that's the way that you can smoothen out that string crossing. So now it sounds pretty, right? So if you are thinking that is the more comfortable fingering for you, that's just one thing that you really have to work on. If you're doing the printed one, you need to make sure that that shift is very consistent. It's a whole step away, but yeah, you just need to make sure that you're doing that little press, hop, and press again. So remember, you're still keeping your first finger gliding on the string. You're just hopping it back and forth. Okay, so you tell for me, I didn't practice that shift, so it sounds a little crazy. Yeah, but if you can get that in tune and that's what works for your hand, then you might as well do it. Okay, so if you've tried that a few times, you've tried working on it and that doesn't work for you, me too. It's okay. The alternate fingering I have is this. You're going to start right where that crescendo is written. You start with the printed fingering, and then instead of shifting, you just put your 2 down. You stay in position until here. I just shifted up with my 3rd finger. It is literally just a half step of a shift. And then I can do the printed fingering after that. So let me tell you the reason why I chose that fingering. It was so I could avoid doing that awkward string crossing in the middle of a slur and also in the middle of my dotted rhythm. So for me, thinking about the slur, the dotted rhythm, and my intonation were too many things all at once, and also my hand was really uncomfortable doing that. So I was like, I need to eliminate something, because I knew that if I was in an audition situation and I was already nervous and starting to panic a little bit, then I probably wouldn't play that in tune. So if I just adjusted the fingering to something that was more comfortable for me, it's probably likely that even if I was nervous, I would still be a little bit more in tune and sounding better than if I did the alternate. No, than the printed one. Okay, so let's go over that fingering again. So I did 3, 1, 2. Stay in position. So 2, 4, 3, 1. And then you just shift up with your 3rd finger so that you're matching the printed fingering again. Okay, so that's what I would suggest right there. All right, so in terms of the musicality for this line, you are really going for that crescendo that's printed in. So that also means you can save a little bit of your volume. So you don't start the first line absolutely forte, or if you do, you need to come away just a little bit before that start of the next crescendo. And you will also want to make sure that you're using your full bow at the beginning of this line, because it is still a continuation of the phrase. So you remember how we did the full bows for the last 3/4 of the first line? We're going to do the same thing at the first 3/4 of this line. So lots of vibrato on those, make it wide vibrato. And then remember, take care of these little notes. And then through that half note, you need to sustain. So what I mean by sustain is you're keeping your volume at the same level. You're not going to let it die down. So da instead of da. So we just don't want our sound to reflect the way that our bow is naturally made. So if you're getting closer to the tip, you should not decrescendo. You're going to fight against that. So sustain. Okay, that's another part. You really need to make sure you're using a little smooth bows for your eighth notes and then big bows for your quarters. That's the biggest advice I can give you right there. Okay, also, if you want to impress us, then still do vibrato as much as you can on all of your eighth notes. Of course, if you're not 100% like certain about your vibrato, that's normal. We're not expecting you to be vibrato pros, especially at this age. So just try your best. Make sure that you're doing it as often as is comfortable for you right now. Okay, so let's keep on going to the third line. All right, so this is your third line of the excerpt. If you look at it, there's not a lot of rhythmic variety. You have the same exact dotted 8th and 16th rhythm as the second line. So what you want to do there, again, really subdivide. Make sure that it's solidly in your head. You're counting 1, 2, and 3 E and A in your head. If you already can have 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A in your head by the measure before, even better. But yeah, you don't have a lot of crazy rhythms here. If you do want to look at that last little blurb that you have at the very end of the page, let's say that second measure where you have that tied over F, you have to wait 3.5 beats for that. So you can draw in the little tick marks. I can put in like what my annotated excerpt looks like a link to it in the description so that you see what I'm talking about. But I drew like little tick marks so that I could make sure that if I was keeping a steady beat, I would feel the 3.5 beats and that would be off. Yeah, the 8th rest is also very important for that. That is your only rest, so you need to make it sound like a rest. All right, here's what the ending of the excerpt might sound like. 1, 2, 3. So, first things first, let's look at that symbol over your last B natural. First of all, it's a natural, but if you see that symbol that looks like a rainbow with a dot in the middle of it, that's a fermata. So that just tells you to hold whatever is underneath it. So in this case, you're holding the B flat. I would hold it maybe at least twice as long as a quarter note, so at least for 2 beats. I usually hold it for a little bit longer, but of course when you are in the orchestra, you're gonna look up at the conductor to see their cutoff. For this line, I want to talk about your bow usage first, and then we'll talk about some different fingerings. Yeah, so in terms of bow usage, let's do from the first measure of this line. We already talked about in this excerpt, you should be doing smooth little bows for your 8th notes and then big bows for your quarter notes, right? Just to sustain your tone. This is the same thing here, but right on that B flat, you must go back to the frog and so that you can save your bow for the half note, right? So I'll show you what that looks like. Save your bow. If I didn't go to the frog, I wouldn't have my whole bow to do that half note. So I really need to save. So if I didn't save, or if I didn't go to the frog, it might sound like this. Which is technically correct, but it just doesn't give the oomph, you know? It's not giving what this excerpt is calling for. So you need to make sure you are giving a little bit more of your soul by giving a little bit more of your arm. Okay. Your next thing, da, 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 da. Do your small little bows for your eighth notes. For that measure, your fourth measure of this third line, I actually circled those 2 eighth notes because I thought they deserved a little bit more love and care, because this is truly leading to the absolute climax of this whole excerpt. That da 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 da. You kind of want those 2 eighth notes to be a little extra, you know? But yeah. You don't want them to be the same old. No, they're leading up to the climax, so you have to use a little bit bigger bow. All right, the next part, if you look at that technically fourth line, if we start there, you must pull your bow to the tip on this E flat so that you have your whole bow to save for right here. 1, 2, 3. Otherwise, you're gonna be stuck trying to sustain a note when there's no way you can do it. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, rest. 2, 3-ish. Yeah, the rest, you only have one rest in this whole excerpt. You should be able to hear it. Make sure you hear that little pause for breath. Okay, so let's talk about some of the more musical things you can do, as well as some fingerings. So for me personally, the fingering that is printed does not work. I just am not a fan of shifting down to 1 and then shifting back up to a 3. I thought that might be a little excessive for me, and I was right, because every time I tried it, I was out of tune. So I'm not even going to show you what that might sound like for me. If that works for you, that's perfect. You just need to really make sure you're practicing that back and forth. Let me give you the alternate fingering though. So for me, I chose to keep the fingering as similar to the second line as possible. So the way that I did that is I started the third line as printed. I used my second finger for the G, and I did a little replace movement. So I literally took my hand, I switched my 3 to be where my 2 just was, my thumb didn't move at all, and I should just be in position right there. So again, I just did that little replacement move, and then I have the same exact fingering as the second line. So that's the 3, 1, 2, 2, 4, 3. And the way that I got out of that, instead of doing a 3, 4, 4, for me, that's a little risky. Again, because this 4, 4 doesn't feel that good for me, and also because it's a whole step. If it was a half step, I wouldn't have any issue doing a 4, 4, because it's pretty small, but it's a whole step, so there's more room for error. So it can work, but I just know if I was nervous, I would probably miss it. So for me, if I was going on the safe side, after doing the 3, 1 for the dotted rhythm, I chose to shift up to a 2. So my next fingering is 2, 3, 4. So I get rid of any shift in the middle of that phrase at all. If you are more comfortable with your third finger doing the vibrating, you can also shift up to a 1, 2, 3, 3. That one, you would really have to practice that shift, the 3, 1, 1. That's more risky. So out of the 2 options, if you are going to change the fingering from the printed one, I would try to suggest doing the 2, 3, 4, just because it's a smaller shift than the 1, 2, 3. I think 1, 2, 3 might be a little too risky, but if you're up for the challenge, you're up for it. Okay, if I'm going for the 2, 3, 4, no matter what, if we're doing the printed or the 2, 3, 4, then the next line, the fourth line, you should just do the printed fingering, because it works really well and you can vibrate really pretty. Make sure you're vibrating on that note as much as possible. If there's one note that you should vibrate in this piece, it's this one because you were holding it for so long. Okay, so 2, 3, rest. And then you're gonna do another replacement movement. So where your 3 just was, you're gonna plop your 4 right there. I didn't actually have to move my thumb at all for me personally, but that's because I know my violin very well. It might take a little experimenting for you. That's totally normal. It's just something you have to practice, as with everything else. You have to practice all of this. That's the fingering that they have printed. 4, 3, 2, 1, cross over on your A string 4. That works really well for some people. Again, for me, doesn't really work. But if you are choosing to do that printed fingering, then my advice for you for the 1, 4 is the same as that second line, you know? So you're going to go as close to the A string as possible. You're going to prepare for your string crossing. So prepare. You should be able to see your bow tilt over to the A string without actually playing it. And then hover your 4 over where it needs to go. So you're trying to make it as smooth as possible. Yeah. So the reason that I wanted to change that fingering for myself is because personally my violin sounds very warm on the A string. So it sounds very bright, da 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 da, and then suddenly you have so I thought it sounded a little too disjunct from each other. So I chose to keep the B natural also on the E string. So the way I did that, I did 4, 3, 3, 2, 1. So I chose to do a 3, 3 with a half step because that gets rid of a big shift. So it feels really similar as if you were just doing a low 3, right? Alternately, you can also do 4, 3, 2, 1, 1. If you just did a 1, then a low 1. If you're good at vibrating on your first finger, that would work well. Okay, so those are just some things that I can suggest you do. Again, your very important things for this is just making sure that your rhythms are really solid and you're able to play with a very steady tempo. So you have to practice with a metronome as much as possible. Luckily, this excerpt is not fast at all. Of course, you're gonna have to get used to pulling your bow fast just to produce the right amount of sound that you need and to produce a very beautiful tone. But your left hand fingers don't have to move super fast. You're just focusing on the way you sound. For this intonation in this last line, you need to make sure that your half steps up in whatever position we're in, up here in the stratosphere, we need to make sure that your fingers stay really close together. As we talked about, if this is how your 3 and 4 look like as a half step in first position, it's probably gonna look like this all the way in like 7th. Okay, so your third finger is literally might overlay on top of your 4, and that's normal. We just got to do some funky things with our hands as violinists when we're up all the way in position. That's okay. Yeah, really listen for your intonation. Practice it without vibrato first. I would also suggest practicing this excerpt without vibrato at all so that you can focus on your bow usage. If you can make it sound good just with your bow and you're phrasing with that, then you know you've won. Remember, vibrato is always just a little extra sprinkle on top. It is not absolutely necessary for you to be able to play well. That is not a requirement. It is just always like a very pretty thing that makes you sound like, ooh, I have something else going on. But it is not required. That being said, you should try to use as much vibrato as possible just because of the nature of this excerpt. But just know, if you are not comfortable with vibrato yet, you're not going to like be in trouble if you can't vibrate every single note. We just want you to try your best. Ooh, one last thing. In that 3rd and 4th measure of the 3rd line, I would suggest keeping your violin up. So that's just a little tip that I have, because usually when we're playing up in the stratosphere, our tendency is we want to hunch in a little bit more, because first of all, we're uncomfortable playing up there if we haven't done it a lot yet. But wow. It already feels uncomfortable because our hand is getting closer to our face. We feel like we have to do this because our bow has to have a good contact point with our bridge. Yeah, so you want to get away from hunching your shoulders in. You want to keep them broad. Yeah, straighten up your back. Make sure your violin is up. You don't want to do this. Automatically, if your violin is down, you're going to be flat. So make it a little easier on yourself. Use gravity to help you. If you keep your violin up and you write that in your music, not only are you going to be in tune, you might sound more confident too, because gravity's helping you bring it in, like both of your hands into you. Okay, so I wish you the best of luck with your audition. You're going to do so well. Just make sure you're listening to recordings as much as possible, and like full orchestra recordings, to make sure that you're getting the right essence of what the piece should sound like. And remember to breathe before your audition. You got it.